pre-internet era, there were a limited number of outlets for dissemination of contemporary art. Apart from word of mouth, there were newspaper reviews and puff pieces, a few monthly and quarterly art magazines, a couple of weekly radio programs, and the occasional, quite rare television coverage, and that was it. The dynamics of each of these media platforms and their reach and impact for a visual artist is actually quite intriguing and worthy of deeper study, but we're not going to go into it today. We're just going to look at newspaper reviews. When I started out, newspaper reviews were found in two Melbourne papers. You had the Herald Sun and the Age, and they were on a Wednesday, and the national paper, the Australian, on a Saturday, and everybody read them. Artists, students, curators, dealers, collectors, culturally interested citizens, your GP and your mother. Everyone knew who the reviewers were, and everyone knew their foibles. If you had an exhibition on, you'd receive a phone call from the gallery, whether it's a commercial gallery or not, saying that the reviewer had been in, and this would be followed by an anxious wait for anything up to 2 weeks to see if anything at all was published. The nuanced codes of success were many and varied, implicitly understood by all. How many sentences were used? Was your exhibition included in a kind of throwaway roundup of what's on, or was it a more detailed report? How many column inches? Was there a reproduction? Were specific words mentioned? And what was the overall judgment? Favourable, unfavourable, ambivalent? There was a not unfounded belief, given the mental fragility of the Australian collector class, that a favourable review could lead to sales. My first newspaper review of my first exhibition was in The Age by Memory Holloway, and I was the only artist reviewed. There were 10 paragraphs, and she mentioned 5 works specifically. The final paragraph read, quote, "This is an engaging show, sparsely presented, full of critical thinking about Australian art and culture, its present and its future." So that was kind of glowing. This led to visits by curators of Australian art from the NGV, directors of the then Melbourne University Gallery and Monash University Gallery, and Patrick McCackey, the then director of the National Gallery Victoria. This is in a gallery in the back room at St Kilda, by the way. Paul Taylor, the founder of the seminal art magazine Art and Text, saw the show and arranged a meeting with a Sydney gallerist, resulting in representation for me with one of the dominant galleries of the 80s, Yule Crowley. And all 8 paintings and 6 drawings sold. Everything sold. So, high visibility and commercial success. Now, a quick note on the financial side. Everything was at young artist prices. The paintings were $500 and the drawings were $120 framed for a total of $4,720. Less opening expenses, commissions, framing of $1,610. My cut was $3,110 before tax. In today's money, about $9,700. And this figure doesn't take into account material cost, studio rent, etc. So it wasn't exactly a windfall for a year's work. But this financial reality aside, the imprimatur of a sellout show, the image of a successful young artist on the rise, created a visibility amongst a wide range of art world players and a guaranteed commercial interest in the work. In my case, while prices were low, that is, at young artist prices. Gradual price increases over the decade to a level where I could assume that I could actually make a living out of painting were met with increased buyer resistance, and attempts by early collectors to profit by putting works to auction was met with indifference. Any speculative market impulses were permanently killed off. The American art writer Dave Hickey once wrote that for the vast majority of artists, given a good work ethic, they make in 3 years the total amount of work they would sell over a lifetime. I have no evidence to dispute this. This is, of course, an American reflection, but I feel unfortunately the situation in Australia is far grimmer. Talking commercially, which is an art school taboo, there are a number of poignant facts we need to elucidate. Our commercial Australian art world is an oligopsony. That is, there are a large number of producers, but only a handful of buyers. Solid recent data is hard to find and often conflicting, but one often quoted measure from 2012 is that the entire Australian art market represents 0.6% of the global art market. That's around $136 million, and that's the same as the packaged vegan food market or beef exports to China. Other figures put it around 5 million, but this is a figure that includes posters, sporting memorabilia, decorative wall hangings and garden sculptures. The number of visual artists in the country, including Indigenous artists, is estimated at 30,000, and the number of non-publicly funded galleries is estimated at 300, meaning each commercial outlet would have to have 100 artists to give everyone representation. The average income of an artist in Australia is between $10,000 and $20,000 a year, and the current poverty line for a single person in Australia is $22,167. And although we haven't had one for a while in an economic downturn, art is the first thing to go and the last to come back. So, in a global art economy, we are, as the former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating once said, and I quote, at the arse end of the world. Unquote. And nothing like this is ever going to happen to an Australian artist. There are many reasons for this, and many vary, but time dictates we'll have to go on with this at another time. But I am reasonably convinced that the Australian art is structurally configured to fail in an international setting. Suffice to say, you cannot apply stories of overseas market achievements to Australian conditions. It is not worthy to consider it a genuine measure of success. So, early visibility for a young artist comes at a price. It becomes precious to maintain a similar output, to maintain a presence, to move your work forward. As Clement Greenberg pointed out, repetition is death, but any major deviation results in confusion and the crime of inconsistency. And you make your mistakes in the full glare of the public. You're inevitably going to stumble, and what you don't realise at the time is that there are a number of people willing and along, happy to help, lend a helping hand in your demise. In my case, it was again in the pages of The Age. The then reviewer Christopher Heathcote reviewed two of my exhibitions, one amongst the best shows I've ever done, and the other possibly the worst. Now, you know a review is bad when the director of the National Gallery of Victoria, as well as your GP, ring you before 7 in the morning to say what a disgrace it is, and that's before you've even seen the newspaper. Here are a few choice quotes. The first opening paragraph. There is a glibness about Stieg Persson's paintings, which is so strong that art as such seems reduced to a secondary consideration. These works are neither radical nor traditional, neither politicised nor aestheticised. They spurn imagination, invention and originality. Yet they do not compensate for these willful absences with good draftsmanship, chromatic subtlety or technical concerns. It went on a lot longer after that. As it is, I left Persson's show feeling I had been perusing the tired gestures of an artist whose ideas are running out. Avant-gardist one decade, potential area-gardist the next. It seems the conceptual use by date of Stieg Persson's oeuvre is now approaching. These lines were written 27 and 25 years ago respectively, and at no point did the vitriolic tenor abate between the good show and the bad. As it turns out, it did mark a turning point in the work, as I was attempting to escape the straitjacket of the black monochrome. Failure, although not welcome, has always been conceptually embraced in the work. The early collage works, in the case here, were made from failed drawings, but they not only provided a template for larger scale pieces, but also a conceptual condition for two elements that continue to be present in some form or iteration, the the flatbed picture plane, and collage, both great achievements of 20th century picture making. Any works that failed this task were burnt. Council regulations now prohibit bonfires, so now I slash. For anyone who's interested in how I got to the green paintings, it's covered in the catalogue, and it's too long to go into here, but it's a series of works that I am ambivalent about and still have a vexatious relationship with. As the wisdom of the old man looks back at the young man, I am now acutely aware that I was trying to fuck it up big time. There was a compulsion to somehow make disparate elements gel to make swirling mess of ill-defined and ambiguous pictorial desires to find a new way for me to make a painting. A very private studio battle carried out in public, and one that I regret spending 3 years figuring it out, when in retrospect I probably could have done it in 12 months. I don't think they're bad paintings, to the contrary, I think some of them are really good, but I don't really like them. And in keeping with the ethos, the paintings were titled after bankrupt companies or imported European racehorses who had failed on Australian tracks. It was also commercial suicide. My friend Bob Jacks used to tell me all these magnificent stories about Australian art, Australian characters in Australian art. And he used to tell me these ones about sort of Rudy Coleman, the great Sydney art dealer who apparently could sell anything except for green paintings. And when I was talking to Don Watson, who talked at the opening of the show the other night, I was telling him the story, he said, yeah, it's the same in publishing, green books don't sell. It was, however, all necessary. Sometimes it just takes time to push through. Most days in the studio, I'm painfully and cripplingly aware of my own limitations and inadequacies, and effectively have to lie to myself to get something done. But something does get done. During this period, I did seriously contemplate giving up and doing something else. I'd shared a studio with a painter who in his early 30s announced he was going to go do architecture, which he did, and now works happily in. A career change was a viable option. A few years after that, I had 12 months stint and nothing to show for it. Now, I'm a 9-to-5 guy, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, and to contemplate a year's work and find nothing of value is deeply depressing. But one day, sick of wallowing in my own misery, I forced the issue. I rang Anna Schwartz, booked an exhibition for later that year, and the next call I made was to my stretcher maker, and I ordered 50 stretchers about that big. So now I had no choice. There was one rule, and that was I had to start one painting every day. So, I'd get into the studio, get one of these blank stretchers out, and some days I just couldn't think of anything, and I just what it was there. So, in this case, I'd had a blood nose, so I'd start painting the tissue. Other occasions, I'd sort of be walking to the studio and think, what am I going to paint today? I'll just grab a twig and paint it. There's some twigs from outside the conkers from outside the studio, a leg of land that I'd bought up the shop, and I had this wall that I kept putting them on and arranging them, and after a while I started to sort of think that there was actually this fantastic dialogue occurring there, which kind of led to this work, which is the work that exemplifies the multiple voices coexisting at once, which is reflected in the title of the potted show, Polyphonic. I haven't done it for a while, but I found that falling back on small canvas strategy takes the pressure off and allows for the unexpected to enter into the arena and reinvigorate the image pool and reinvigorate ideas. And when it's flowing, what happens in the studio more than makes up for sustained periods of cultural, curatorial and commercial and institutional indifference. So, contemplating notions of success, those career markers such as curatorial, commercial and institutional success although I've had them and hopefully will continue to have them, they're probably the least important. So I'm going to take a quick look at the ledger here. I am a serial failure in pursuing opportunities. I don't like networking, and that comes at a price. I am a miserable failure when it comes to getting grants or overseas studios. I've lost count of the numbers of failed applications, 30, 40 maybe, I don't know. Some of them, given the work that I was doing at the time, made me an ideal candidate. And to be honest, I only have contempt for the Australian Council and its processes. The one and only grant I received from them was for an application done in 45 minutes, with images that had already been seen, and with my wife insisting I include all the current art cliches, none of which had any relationship to my work. Congratulations, here's $20,000. So I went out and bought a new fridge and a new dishwasher. We had a baby on the way, we needed it. Other than that, I've funded 35 years of practice by myself.
Wow.
I have failed in letting at least half a dozen works that should have been torched escape the studio, and they periodically come back to haunt me. That was early on. I now realise your worst enemy is your bad paintings. Some of the things I count as success may seem a little strange. I am very proud of my poor auction record. Works don't come up much, and they don't attain high prices. In the auction world, my output is seen as erratic, the content often at odds with the bourgeois living room, too difficult to speculate on, and this has been the case now for over 20 years. What it also means is that people who do buy them keep them. They like living with them. I was visiting a collector friend the other week, and in the room we were sitting and there were two paintings. There was one of mine from 2004 and a 1967 Fred Williams. So that's pretty good company to keep. The internal critic is a harsh one. Self-doubt always present. When I begin something, I can find at least a dozen good reasons not to do it. So I'm reasonably convinced that giving yourself a licence is one of the most successful things you can do. I painted this when I was 23. I painted that when I was 58. And there are hundreds of paintings in between. And that wouldn't be there. They just wouldn't be there if I hadn't turned up to the studio. I remember listening to this radio program about an author. Someone was asking the author, how does he work? It was a famous American author, I cannot remember, I think it might have been Richard Ford, I'm not sure. Saying, how do you work? And he's saying, well, every day I have a shed down the bottom of the garden, and there's a typewriter and a desk and a chair and paper, and that's it. And at 9 o'clock I go down, and I stay there until 12 o'clock. And some days I might get, a page. Other days I'll be working for 3 hours and I'll get a sentence. But at least I've got a sentence. So making the commitment to turn up day after day, year after year, I count as one of my great successes. And then there's this. This is a painting called History Painting. The centre is a scrunched up newspaper, and it's of the obituary pages from The Age from 2000 and 2005. And on the death notices, there's a couple of names there that you can read. One is this Van Tol Newman, baptised Caleb, who was a 25-year-old man executed for drug trafficking by the Singapore government in 2005. He was trying to pay off debts for approximately $25,000 that he owed, and to repay his brother's legal fees, whose business had gone bad. And it was, at the time, an incredibly polarising event. I remember having a absolutely scorching argument at a dinner party one night, and nice bourgeois dinner party one night with one of my wife's, well, I don't think we ever saw her after this, one of my wife's friends, a good Catholic girl who was insisting that this boy should hang. Despite various attempts, mostly half-hearted by the government of Australia, the young man was hung in Changi prison on the 2nd of December 2005. This morning, as the darkness of night receded, at the break of day, our brother Van Tron Nguyen returned to his Creator. He is now with Jesus, light and life of the world, said a local Catholic priest, glossing over the barbarity of the actual act. Enshrined in Singapore's Official Secrets Act, the actual process is actually well known. This is colonial legacy, the official table of drop, which is a manual calculates the correct length of rope. The rope is boiled and stretched to prevent any springing or coiling. Wax or soap lubricate the knot for a smooth and swift uppercut delivery to the neck. Now I'm going to stop there. But you get my point. Actually, but not before mentioning the truly cruel pre-execution photo shoot where the condemned are taken out of their prison guard, put in civvies and asked to smile and act natural. Apparently the photos are given to the family after the execution. Now, 4 days after Newman was hung, a news poll found that 52% of Australians were in favour of the death penalty. And I suspect the number would be quite different if Newman had been a blonde girl from Brighton. A painting can't save a life, but it can witness and make testimony. Perhaps when I'm long gone, an art researcher might ponder this painting and rediscover a story of a young man trying to help his brother, who made a massive misguided mistake and paid for it with his life. Success then is that at least once in my life I've made a painting without compromising my aesthetic predilections about something that really mattered. Thank you.